The Democratic Party's popularity hitting an all-time low in a new poll, and a couple of polls. All that's not stopping them from pushing harder against Donald Trump, with 65% of voters saying they do not want compromise, even if it means nothing gets done. Democratic strategist, former Bill Clinton advisor, and Mike Bloomberg advisor, Doug Schoen joins us now. Doug, what surprised you about the poll?
What surprised me about the poll is how quickly the American people, and even Democrats, Brian, recognize the degree of disorganization, chaos, and lack of strategic direction my party has.
So when you see that the 65% don't want compromise, that's not really what Doug Schoen is about. How do you feel about that when the party that you're in does not want to even go halfway?
I feel that they're heading towards further destruction and devaluation of a brand that is at an all-time low, Brian. I've written and said, as you pointed out, that the Democrats should compromise where appropriate and disagree where they must on things like Social Security and health care and the like. But to just oppose, as my party has, is embarrassing and wrong.
Chuck Schumer had no choice. Am I right?
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Because it would have given Donald Trump more power to do whatever, fund whatever he wanted. And it's obvious Democrats would be responsible. The New York Post has an editorial about that. Why do some rational thinkers like Nancy Pelosi, who is very savvy, why does she feel differently?
They're so angry with Trump. What, the pundits have called Trump derangement syndrome is such that people can't put the greater interests of the country and indeed the party ahead of their narrow partisan interests. I think we need to keep our government open at a time of economic dislocation and uncertainty. And I think Schumer did the right thing under difficult circumstances.
Right now, a poll says 30% of Democrats don't see a clear leader. The one who has 10%, the highest, is AOC. Who does Doug Schoen think is the standard bearer for the party? Who are two people you're looking at to maybe take you to the midterms and beyond?
Well, we at this point do not have such a leader in the Congress. People like Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, Steve Beshear, the governors have probably the best chance of emerging as a leader. But candidly, Brian, right now the poll is correct. We are leaderless, rudderless, and directionless.
All right, but you're not, Doug. You always know where you're going. Thanks
I'm not.
So much.
I know where to go, and with the help of the American people, we'll get there.
They should listen to you. Straight. Thanks, Doug Schoen.
All right, Bill, well, there is more bad news for Democrats. Two new polls show the party's favorability plunging to an all-time low. Dean Phillips, former Democratic congressman from Minnesota, is going to join us. And he's joining us here. I thought we had a break, but we don't. Excuse me, Dean Phillips. I probably will end up with a polling rating as low as the Democrats after that screw up there. It's good to have
and
you here.
And I lower than you, so don't worry.
I was just thinking about, just when you think you've hit rock bottom on the Democratic side, it feels like there's like another layer to go underneath. Like at this point, do you think it has bottomed out?
Well, as a Democrat, I'd sure like to think so. But Dana, as you well know, this is just the pendulum of politics. I think it was 2013 where the Republicans had even lower approval ratings, if you can imagine that, than Democrats do right now. And then they swept the elections in 2014. I think it was one of the biggest shifts in number of seats in the House in a long, long time. So this can change. And a lot of this dismay is actually Democrats upset with the Democratic Party. But I think what's really lost in all this, Dana, is the fact that Americans are pretty disappointed in both parties right now. Republican approval numbers are barely 50%. Over 50% of Americans now consider themselves independents.
Well,
and we are one of the only countries in the world that only have two parties, and I think that's one of the big issues.
NBC had the favorability of the Democratic Party at 27%. CNN had it at 29%. But the number I thought was most interesting was that NBC saying that, asking people, do you think the country is on the right track or the wrong track? November of just last year, 5 months ago, it was 27% on the right track. Today, it's 44% on the right track. So perhaps, I grant you that the Republicans aren't necessarily running away with the popularity contest award, but that is quite a turnaround, and that really has to do with President Trump winning and then implementing what people wanted to see, right?
You know, I think there's absolute truth to that. Americans like to see action and movement, and they like to know something's changing, especially in this age of disruption. So that's no surprise. And I think I speak for even a lot of Democrats, where there are certain elements of the Trump platform that many of us support. We wish there was more transparency and respect for law and maybe a little more compassion. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of Americans are aligned about what needs to change in this country. But Dana, also, those same polls are showing that on the generic ballot, Democrats are up by 1 point in the midterm elections. So that's why
But the infighting amongst Democrats is interesting. People were just seeing on their screen while you were speaking, they saw you, and then they also saw a photograph of Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. So no love lost between these two over the weekend, and Chuck Schumer is just taking a ton of heat from Democrats. Listen to this. This is media Democrats on Schumer. Watch.
There's an emotional need to stop Donald Trump and Elon Musk from running over this party. And I think Chuck Schumer has radically misread the room.
The reality here is there was no message, no strategy, and at the end of the day, no leadership. And this is really a black mark, I think, on Chuck Schumer.
I'm pissed. There's actually little that the Senate minority leader can say, and the 10 Democrats that voted with the Republicans can say, to appease somebody like me. I'm about to change my registration to independent.
And this just in, Chuck Schumer, who has a brand new book out about anti-Semitism, is canceling his book tour due to possible security concerns. He was supposed to get that underway, but the protests were not coming from the right. They're coming from his left. What do Democrats do about that problem?
Well, as I tweeted and I felt for a long time, it's been long overdue for generational change in the Democratic Party. Chuck Schumer has been in this position too long. I think it's time for fresh ideas, fresh perspectives. I'm actually pleased that we did not have another government shutdown. I don't think Chuck Schumer did the wrong thing. I think he communicated it poorly, and I think he blindsided Hakeem Jeffries, which is, of course, a no-no in any organization, let alone the United States Congress. So different perspectives, perhaps.
Let me just put
look,
up
at
on
the end
the
of
board,
the day,
just
Dana,
real quick. I want to ask you a quick question. If you could just put up on the board here, this is a poll asking who is the leader of the Democratic Party right now, and you can see everybody here. AOC at 10%, Nancy Pelosi at 2%, Tim Walz at 1%. You're not on this list. Would you like to be?
No, my aspirations are for the country, not for the party. I think what you just articulated about who Americans think the leader of the Democratic Party is says it all. We are rudderless, and somebody will rise. The biggest mistake we made, Dana, was not having a competitive primary in the 24 election. We failed to introduce the country to a whole bench of compelling young candidates, many of whose names are known, many not. That's why we made a grave error in judgment for a lot of reasons. But once again, we will persevere and keep the faith, everybody, but we got to work together. I'm sick of the nonsense, and I hope my party and Republicans put their better angels above anything else.
All right, Dean Phillips, go have a good Monday. Thanks for being here.
Well, we begin here. The Democratic Party is facing a reckoning. Brand new polls do not look good. They paint a brutal reality for Democrats, while President Trump is soaring to new highs. Both of these entities setting records. So first to the Democrats. A new NBC News poll shows just 27% of voters have a positive view of the Democratic Party. That's the lowest positive rating in the last 35 years of NBC polling. And when you hop on over to CNN, they found that just 29% of voters see the party in a positive light. Now, that, too, is the lowest ever in CNN polling going back 30 years. Two historic lows for Democrats. President Trump, it's the opposite. He is surging. NBC found that Trump's job approval rating at 47%, plus his personable favorable rating at 46%, and also a 44% number of Americans who believe the country is on the right track, combined to be three all-time, all-record highs for President Trump's political career in the history of NBC's polling. Kaylee, this is stunning. I mean, these are historic numbers by two different polling entities, by their own standards, painting two very different pictures of where voters are with the two parties.
Yeah, really bad news for Democrats, but I'm sure if they put Jasmine Crockett on CNN a few more times, that'll take care of the problem. You know, it's amazing to see as a Gen Zer how the Democratic Party has imploded, because Democrats were ascendant for much of my life. I grew up in the Obama years when Democrats enjoyed a 60% favorability rating, and then you compare it to this. In fact, that same poll found that just 7% of Americans have a very favorable view of Democrats right now. And by the way, a different poll found that 7% of Americans also think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. So I have a question for those 7% of Americans. And I think it's because, you know, Democrats dominated political culture, but they also dominated so much of the cultural institutions that really formed my childhood. They dominated Hollywood. They dominated the education system that I grew up in. And then all of that has started to crumble over the past several years because they got arrogant. They thought that they could continue to hollow out the working class and pass economic policies that only favored the upper 1%, and with immigration policies that replaced American workers with cheap migrant labor without facing any consequences. They thought that they could start to stifle speech online without facing any consequences. And they thought that they could continue to bribe voters into remaining party loyalists, including Gen Zers like myself, with vague plans of student loan debt forgiveness that they knew would never come to fruition. And we woke up. We realized what was happening. And this is what the Democrats are experiencing right now. And the problem is that they spent so long running with this controlled narrative that they have never figured out what they actually stand for or who they want to represent. So now they have no clear leader, no agenda, no message. They can't even decide which tactic of resistance is better, whether it's singing Kumbaya on the House floor or vandalizing Teslas. And this is the alternative? This is what you're providing with us? Right. No wonder Trump's approval ratings are so high.
Emily, on the note of the Democrats, CNN and NBC both found the same answer to a question about what Democrat voters think their party should be doing. And this, in a nutshell, is the conundrum Democrats find themselves in. Because I'm sure part of the party says we need to moderate. Look at what Gavin Newsom did with women's sports. But look at this. Democrats should, 57% of their own party say they should mainly work to stop Republicans. NBC found 65% say stick to your positions, even if it means not getting things done. You can't lose the anchor of your party, and you risk doing so if you take the Gavin Newsom approach.
Well, feelings are the worst anchor, right? Because they go up and down. And what we see there is the fissure in leadership, because there's a fissure in the party because they don't have an anchor that isn't based on something that's mercurial, vague, unconstitutional, most likely, and also not reflective of the center of their party. So I thought what jumped out at me is this, that AOC, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was seen and identified by 1 out of 6 of those polled by CNN under the age of 45 that identified as liberal as, quote, emblematic of the party's values. But not one Democratic leader polled in double digits and no one moderate for those same values, meaning that the Democrats don't have someone that is emblematic of the values because their values aren't solidified. They have no idea what their values are. Now, you contrast that with the Republican Party, you contrast that with the GOP, and you can articulate with specificity what our tenets are. It's the right to privacy, the right to worship, the freedom of speech. It's constitutional values, and it's against the backdrop of a lean, efficient government. But to your point, when you introed this, we have AOC saying, how dare that they use the one bit of leverage to actually vote with the Trump points, but that she says Medicare and Social Security are all at risk, but they're not. So the whole point is that if entitlement programs, is that the hook that you want to hang your hat on? Well, those aren't at issue. The issue is the massive waste to the tune of millions of dollars per minute that this government is spending on behalf of those policies that actually mean nothing because they've been so thwarted this entire time. So for all of those in the Democrat Party, the whole point is they can't identify their values because they whimsically change with the hour of what trans or activists or whatever is pulling the fishhook to the left. And at the end of the day, if you can't articulate what you stand for, that's why you have no party and it's why you have no leader.
Harris, and Emily mentioned AOC a few times. She's the only one who got in double-digit support for who's the leader of our party. And underneath, I'm interested in this. You see Kamala Harris, you see Bernie Sanders, you see Hakeem Jeffries. Those are not moderate figures there. Those are progressive. So the party's saying lean further to the left.
Well, and they've been saying that for a while. It just didn't time out well for Bernie Sanders. He was ahead of the game here, if you will. But with AOC, yeah, she's in double digits. But I'm with Emily on this. It's still really low. It's not like she's at 50% or 40 or 30 or 20. She's at 10. And so what that says is those far left policies are not resonating enough, even for perhaps the most well-known or popular young person who's running right now. This is also a generational shift, I think, that we're going to see in 2028. And it might be part of the reason why, you know, President Trump chose J.D. Vance. He is that next younger generation. I mean, he was very present in doing that and looking forward as well, maybe prophetic. But what's going on with AOC and Jasmine Crockett is more about a generational shift than it is about political policies. And why that matters? Well, sooner or later, they're going to be called on, well, what can you do for the American people that the Republicans haven't already done for 4 years? And so let's flip the switch. I like to look at the navel-gazers, the Democrats right now trying to figure out how to get along and commit crimes against each other with their nasty words and blah, 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 and the American people commit crimes against them, cussing them out, moral crimes. But what I'm focused on right now is Republicans continuing to win. They need to rack up the deliverables, not just past promises, but make some new ones and make them count and make your word good. Stick together. My last guest, Matt Gorman, who was advisor with Tim Scott's campaign, said, look, they've got to start to focus on racking up those victories and telling people over and over and over what they can do for them. Sooner or later, the party that's had the White House 12 out of 16 years, the Democrats, are going to figure something out. And it may very well be that outsider, as Trump was 16 years ago.
David, yeah, you might be right about that. You know, David, I want to bring in the sage messenger of the Democratic Party. Her name's Jasmine Crockett. She brought in 4% support for being the leader of the party. She has a very specific fear 4 years from now. Listen to her fear.
You're close with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. Some of your fellow House Democrats say, and not just progressives, by the way, we've heard that moderates have said this too, that they're ready to support her. To challenge Chuck Schumer in a Democratic primary. Would you get behind that?
That's 4 years from now. If you were asking me at least in 2 years, then I would have an absolute answer. But I can tell you that there are a lot of people that are watching his leadership in this moment. This is the moment. We don't even know what elections will look like in 4 years, if we will have elections in.
I mean, did I miss something? Are we not having elections in 4 years?
No, remember Oprah said if Trump gets elected, there will be no more elections. To all of your points, and to bring it to the point of piling on the wins, remember when I sat on this couch, as I have, and said, issues and desired outcomes for the American people align, right? They want safety, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We want to eat. We want all the things that make our life better, more normal. We want to function. That's where Americans are. Where Jasmine Crockett or AOC or others are is because they lacked actual foundation in a value system, in a political value system, in policy. They're just spouting to get somewhere, which means they're hollow. Those that follow them will eventually fall. And I'm fine with that because they don't align with America and how we've evolved from a nation that is now about to reach our quarter millennium mark, from a nation that had, yes, slavery, segregation, that has been through world wars, that has helped the world, that has had our own sets of issues, to the nation that we are today that is capable, able, and moving forward in well into the 21st century. And we're doing that because we're focusing on strength of our culture, our Constitution, strength of who we are as a people. Those are very basic things, but if you provide that as the Republican Party in your policy and in your wins, and you rack up those wins, that's right, people will stay with you rather than go for aberrant change.
Because you never really get tired of winning.
No, you don't.
And if you get no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, the Republican Party will be unstoppable.
View Democratic Party favorably. CNN SRS, look at this, 29%. NBC News, you want to go lower than that? How about 27%? Both are record lows. All I can say is I'm a big fan of the oldies, so I'm going to quote Chubby Checker, how low can you go?
All right, so as we await that White House briefing, a brand new NBC poll reveals that President Trump is enjoying his highest approval rating ever, but is on shaky ground when it comes to the economy. Meanwhile, Democrats are in disarray, with the party now facing record low popularity. Here's analysis from Robert Wolf and Steve Moore. All right. Joining us now ahead of that briefing. We're going to squeeze you in, guys, because we are awaiting that briefing. So first up, Robert, how do you respond to the Democrats in disarray? Are they going to get their act in gear here?
I know what you were going to say, this in gear, but we won't. But 27% is higher than what I would give them. And, you know, I've been a staunch Democrat my whole life. So, you know, listen, I thought the way they acted in the joint session was completely disrespectful. How you don't stand for the kid with cancer is ridiculous. I thought the continuing resolution, they showed that they were in complete disarray with a lack of leadership. I think I've never heard more conversations about ridding their minority leader Schumer than I have in decades. And I think that being anti-Trump is not a message. You have to be for something. We have a country that's aspirational. I think the president is making mistakes on the economy, and we can talk about that, obviously. But with respect to his favorability versus the Democrats, not surprising.
It's a really interesting point that he makes, Steve, not being for something. You can make the case that the popularity ratings with President Trump and the Republican Party is because they do stand for something. And for those who this election was about the economy and crime and immigration, they saw a party standing for something.
Look, I agree with everything that Robert just said, and I appreciate his honesty about this. I think the Democrats are a little bit lost in the wilderness, and I'm not, Sandra, I'm not a rah-rah Republican here to tell you Republicans are the solution to all Americans' problems. But I do think the Democrat, when I first came to Washington 40 years ago, we worked all the time with the Democrats. During the Reagan presidency, we did the 1986 Tax Reform Act that was passed by huge bipartisan measures, and that was true throughout the 90s as well with Bill Clinton. I think that they've become so captured by the extreme left, and I think the problem, Sandra, is that when you've got AOC from the House and Elizabeth Warren in the Senate being kind of the spokesman of the party, I think that turns a lot of people off.
You know, when I look at this NBC poll, Robert, I think about how people just feel like this is an administration that is going to bat for them if they didn't like what they were feeling about the economy or they didn't like the status of their family finances. And this NBC poll does show that 54% disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, 44% do approve of it. So where do you see all of this going? Is he going to be able to answer the demands of the American people and the improvement they were hoping to see with prices in particular?
You know, we've been speaking about the economy for a long time, and I think President Trump's making some unforced errors. Neither Steve nor I talked about a recession at all in the fourth quarter of 24. We were both nervous about long-tail inflation. The idea that we're talking about a recession now because these trade wars that really don't need to be, and tariffs should not be across the board. They should be used as a blunt instrument on steel or solar or tires or whatever it may be. But we're forcing literally consumer sentiment to plunge. We've had it decades low, and we're also seeing delinquencies move up, and people are nervous. And I just think this is an unforced error for someone that actually won on the economy.
Steve, final thought.
Yeah, I think that Trump should be really emphasizing the importance of this tax cut, or else we're facing a $4 trillion tax increase on January 1st. And I kind of agree with Robert that I think, even though I think in the end of the day, I feel pretty confident that he's going to prevail on some of these demands he's making on China and Canada and the Europeans to lower their tariffs. Let's get the tax cut done and then talk about the tariffs, because I think its sequence is better. I think we're going to avoid a first quarter recession. And I think once we get the trade deals done, I think you're going to see a boom both in the real economy and the stock market.
All right, we're inside that 2-minute warning. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
We've become a party of people who preach down to others, you know, who scold them, who say, if you don't agree with me, you're not only wrong, but you're a bad person. I think we need to stop preaching and start listening. Start meeting Americans where they are. Don't take these minority positions on cultural issues and say, hey, if you don't meet this strict liberal litmus test, then you're not even a Democrat.
Democrats trying to find answers, but the party may be digging itself just a deeper hole. And their infighting has gotten even worse after last week's government funding vote. Let's bring in Jonathan Cott, former Joe Manchin communications director, and T.W. Origi, the former national press secretary for the National Republican Senatorial Committee. So let's look at what a new CNN SSRS poll shows about the favorability of Democrats versus Republicans. Oh, look at that. Democrats, just 29% approval. Republicans, 36%. Jonathan, that's not a good look.
Nope. I'm surprised it's at 29. Look, we got beat pretty,
that's a high water mark.
Yeah, we got beat pretty bad in the last election, and we're trying to figure out what our message is to combat Donald Trump and Elon Musk right now. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of infighting until we get a consistent message, and that's what played out last week. I understand we want to fight, we want to have this fight with them, but there's also the side of, the Senate. I guess it's the sort of like fight hard and hope caucus. But if we had shut down the government, all that would have done is let Donald Trump and Elon Musk continue doing what they wanted to do with no guardrails. They could have said, you know what, 80% of the government is now deemed worthless and you're not coming back, right? What happens in a shutdown is you have to say who's essential and who gets to work, and they get to decide that when the government shut down. And if he says 90% of all agencies are no longer essential, when the government reopens, they don't come back. And that's what we were faced with. And I think that's why Chuck Schumer at the end said, look, I don't want to do this because I want to have this fight in the halls of Congress, not letting Elon do whatever he's been doing.
But he's really getting pasted for doing that, though. Let's see what's going on here. AOC is being encouraged to mount a primary challenge against him in 2028. Jasmine Crockett wants Democrats to reconsider his leadership. Hakeem Jeffries declined to defend him. Even Chris Murphy tiptoed around it when he asked if he supports Schumer. So is Schumer dead man walking, or is he okay?
No, not quite yet. He's not up until 2028. He's got some time, and I think the Senate caucus still has to figure itself out. But I want to build off something Jonathan said. It's deeply unpopular to shut down the government, but the Democrats can't get legislative fights right unless they understand the big takeaways from the election and where they're losing across the board. It turns out that cutting government, enforcing immigration law, ending wars still is popular with the American people. The Democrats haven't been able to wrap their heads around that, and so they're swinging their arms, flailing around, trying to come up with an opposition. But again, they're not listening to the American people, and Donald Trump has painted them into a corner where they have to violently and aggressively defend the status quo, which the American people are not happy about.
So that same CNN poll asked voters who the leadership of the Democratic Party is and who really represents the core values. Came up with some interesting results. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez led the charge with 10% of respondents. It's still not a lot. It's not like 40 or 50%. Kamala Harris was second. Bernie Sanders was 8. Hakeem Jeffries 6. I mean, when you take a look at that cast of characters, for the most part, that's the far left of the party. But we were having an interesting conversation as we were in the break about whether or not AOC would mount a primary challenge against Schumer.
No, I don't think she does. She's got 4 years until this actually happens, and I think what she'll do is look at, where she is in 4 years. She's very young. I think what she would be smart to do is look at when Schumer says, I'm retiring, and he could pass the torch to her. Or Senator Gillibrand might just say, look, I'm done with this. I may run for president, and she'll pass the torch. She has the largest megaphone on the House side, and she uses that very well. I think she should use it to maybe go against Elon Musk and Donald Trump and not against our own party. I think if right now we don't have a leader, most parties, when they're out of power, don't have a leader when you don't have the presidency. She needs to be directing it there and saying, look, we're going to be the party that's fighting for providing food to hungry kids, seniors, Social Security, and not just this infighting game that the American people don't care about and they don't understand.
But you think if Schumer decides not to run again in 2028, she's a shoo-in for that seat?
I think looking around, yes, she's probably a shoo-in because you have the other big name in that caucus is Richie Torres, and he's going to run for governor.
So one other quick thing I want to throw to TW here, and this is the Democrats are famous for eating their own. Listen to Jasmine Crockett.
Great job.
Talking about Senator John Fetterman after Fetterman criticized the Choose Your Fighter TikTok. Listen here.
He's not the one to talk about anything. I mean, this is a guy that doesn't seemingly want to own a suit. I'm not really sure. But I don't show up in hoodies when I'm going on the floor. So I just don't think that he's necessarily the one to actually have an opinion about this.
Which is rich because they said it was very disrespectful to ask President Zelensky about his suit, but apparently it doesn't matter here. Hey, look, if Jasmine Crockett and AOC can do a lot more TV, I will be a very happy man. That graphic made me very happy that the Democrats think the Americans think of the party as the party of AOC. It is the party of AOC. A big part of the reason why Democrats lost last cycle is because there was a far aggressive shift to the left. AOC says they didn't go far left enough. If that's the lesson they want to take home, I love it. Jasmine Crockett, go get them.
All right. Well, they're still way over there. We'll see if they go further to the left. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
First to senior White House correspondent Peter Doocy, fresh off of today's briefing. We just saw a good clip of the Q&A in there, Peter, moments ago. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Martha. And officials here are telling us that the White House is complying with this court order not to deport any more gang members, plane loads full of gang members, to another country until a judge rules on the use of the Alien Enemies Act. But at the same time, officials are telling us that the deportations are not going to stop.
That was a bad group of, as I say, hombres. In many respects, it's more dangerous than war because, you know, in war they have uniforms. You know who you're shooting at. You know who you're going after.
The White House's argument is that the president gets more say in something like deportations than a single judge in a single courthouse does. And they don't have a plan B. Instead, using today's briefing to emphasize the heinous crimes these gang members are accused of.
If you guys can't send 200 Tren de Aragua terrorists at a time to El Salvador, where are you going to send them instead?
It's a very good question. You'd have to ask the courts and the people on the left who are trying to fight this administration. These are monsters who tortured, raped, and murdered a 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungre. They murdered 22-year-old nursing student Laken Riley. They led a multi-state sex trafficking operation involving smuggling women into the United States, holding them in stash houses in Louisiana, Florida, New Jersey, Texas, and Virginia, and forcing them into prostitution.
The hearing about whether or not the White House can continue with these deportation flights of gang members to El Salvador has been moved back to 5 p.m. So we hope to have some answers about this by the time we talk to Brett Baer later.
Okay,
Martha.
sounds good, Peter. Thank you very much. Your tie matches the grass behind you. So happy St. Patrick's Day. Well done.
Happy St. Patrick's Day, America. Unfortunately, there's no luck of the Irish for the Democrat Party, who seem to have hit shamrock bottom in 2 new polls. NBC finding 55% of Americans have a negative view of the Democrats, and CNN is echoing that with 54% viewing the party unfavorably. But it looks like President Trump has found the pot of gold. 47 is hitting his highest approval that he's ever had as commander-in-chief. And he's got more Americans than ever saying that the country is headed in the right direction.
First of all, the mood of the country. This really jumped out. We asked folks, is it on the right direction or the wrong direction? That 44% who say right direction, that's up since November. And if that doesn't seem like a lot, the last time it cracked 40%, you got to go back to 2012. The last time it actually hit 44 or higher, January of 2004.
And while President Trump soars with a united Republican Party at his side, the angry Democrats are tearing each other down in a full-blown civil war. The loonies are now making Chuck Schumer the scapegoat after he caved and backed the Republican spending bill.
You know why, Dems suck at messaging? Because they never talking about nothing, and they do nothing.
The idea that Chuck Schumer is the only one that's got a brain in the room and the only one that can think through all of the pros and cons is absolutely ridiculous.
I've never seen this level of volcanic anger at a Democrat ever. I think Chuck Schumer has radically misread the room.
I'm pissed.
Yep.
Okay, so, there's actually little that the Senate minority leader can say, and the 10 Democrats that voted with the Republicans can say, to appease somebody like me. I'm about to change my registration to independent.
Ha! Chris Matthews isn't feeling that thrill up his leg over a familiar face making fun of the Democrats.
They laugh in a kind of a humiliating way about their opponents instead of, you watch Gutfeld at night. All it is making fun of Democrats.
Yeah, if you're triggered, I don't want to hear it. I want to hear the facts.
And meanwhile, the Democrats are doubling down on the radical wing of the party. that could sink them for good. AOC is leading the pack of potential leaders of the Democrat Party. All right, Greg, I'll start with you, seeing as Chris Matthews is not too happy with you.
Fan of yours.
He says that you are humiliating the Democrats.
You know, when you lose Chris Matthews,
You lost everything. Why
it's
go to
time to
work?
retire,
I thought that was a
America.
compliment.
No, it was. You know that he'd never heard of the show before until he heard about it on NPR, and now he has to outlaw laughing. Again, I said this before. If you're the neighbor that is living next door to somebody throwing a party, do you call the police on them? Or do you go over there, introduce yourself, say hello, and say, hey, do you think you can turn it down a little? They're the neighbor that calls the police. They want to have fun, but they just can't. I think, you know, what you're seeing, again, is the consequences of identity politics. They thought that expanding the tent by kind of like just getting all these identities together, create little boxes, stack them on top of each other, that would work. But what happened is, by adding one box, 3 left. They became a sanctuary for silliness. You know, if you start, you know, we're so inclusive. We believe men should be in girls' locker rooms. We support Hamas supporters. We don't want you to deport gangs in American cities to their countries that they came from. We back every recidivist criminal and every race hoaxer. What happens is, by inclusivity, you excluded the normal people, and they wanted to get the hell out of here. Pretty soon, the face of your party became the hysterical activist screaming on behalf of Hamas in Colombia. So you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of those women who write letters to men on death row, and then they marry one of them. You know, their maternal compassion gets hijacked. Used to be animal rights, you know, but now it's militants and trans. And when you hear the chants on campus, it's all predominantly female voices. The party has become the troubled, lonely woman who marries a mass murderer, and they're stuck with them. The party's got to realize, and you know, they got to realize that compassion is not compassion if it's for the wrong thing. True compassion is telling somebody who's doing a bad thing not to do it, which is what we've been doing before. This is the heart of compassion for the Democratic Party. The Dems no, it's true. We've been telling them, no, stop that. But now they have no plan B, which is ironic.
Okay. All right, Brian, given the apparent disconnect between the public and the positive view of the direction that the country's going and the negative view of the media and the Democrats, is this like signaling like a larger shift in politics in America?
I think so, because the Democrats really have no way of addressing. They're not realizing the Republicans are addressing a problem. I mean, whether you like it or not, Social Security is going to go bankrupt in a few years. Whether you like it or not, the Medicare formula for giving people health care has got to be reformed right away. The deficit is a problem. It's 7.2% of all our revenue. These have to be addressed. It's not my idea. This is an emergency 5-alarm fire. So what the Republicans are doing is saying, okay, this is how we're doing it. This is how we're doing it. And all they're saying is, what a bunch of bad people. And isn't Donald Trump awful? I mean, we have to find a way to build a ship in under 5 years. We can't do that anymore. If Democrats have a better way to do that, let's hear it. So enough of the personality. I know you're obsessed with Donald Trump, but he's gone in 3.5 years, right? 3 years, 3 3/4 years. You have to have your own plan. And Chuck Schumer, I hate to say it, the New York Post is right. He had no choice. Yep. He had to do this. I mean, for them to unload on this guy when he lost the day the speaker passed the bill on a party line vote, except for Jared Golden and on one other voter and Massey. For me, Schumer actually did the right thing. Mitch McConnell would have done the same thing, because you lost on election day. You lost both houses and the White House, and then you lost when Speaker Johnson did his job. So if you went ahead and did what they wanted, Donald Trump would be laughing all weekend.
That's
right. He'd be like, I'm funding everything I want and not funding anything, and it's all your fault, Democrats. So he had no choice.
You know, Dana, Simone Sanders was so disgusted. And, you know, by being angry, it's like, we can say Schumer did the right thing, but it's like she's ignoring the fact that if the Democrats don't like Doge, they were giving Donald Trump the ability to Doge the whole government by saying who is considered an essential worker and who isn't.
Yeah, anger is not going to get you very far, but I do understand one reason why they're angry with Chuck Schumer, because he gave the impression all week long that he was going to vote against it up until Thursday night. And then all of a sudden on Friday, he changes his tune. And I think that was the anger. the smart leadership thing, leader position should have been, we actually don't have the votes, guys, and it could be really bad for us. We are going to live to fight another day. Stick with me on this one. When they try to pass all these tax cuts for the rich, then we will go en masse. But right now, this is not the fight that we need. He didn't do any of that because he can't do any of that. And the sad thing is, for the Democrats, it's very grim when Chuck Schumer is your voice of reason. Yeah. Things are so bad for them that he wrote a book about anti-Semitism that he cannot promote. It comes out tomorrow. He's canceled the entire book tour, not because the right's going to protest him, but because he was going to get protested on the left. And so therefore, you can't even talk about anti-Semitism. Plus, the other thing is, when you look at the media that we showed here, like I would say liberal leaning, but even the Democrats on the media panels, they seem to look at all of this polling that's devastating for Democrats and say, yep, we're exactly right in all of our positions. And then they continue to do the same thing over and over again. Chris Murphy was on TV saying, the polling shows we need to fight Trump harder. He didn't say fight him smarter. He said just fight them harder.
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing is, one of the things that we saw today is that AOC is kind of leading the pack in terms of who is the leader of the Democrat Party. I mean, you know, what does she have to do, I mean, to actually get the public trust back in the Democrat Party?
Well, I think that what you're seeing in AOC being the leader on that poll, and it was only by 1 percentage point, is that Democrats are desperate for somebody who has fight in them. They don't actually really care what their politics are. And that was the most interesting finding from the NBC poll this weekend. So in April 2017, when Trump had just come in for the first time, 59% of Democrats wanted their party to work with Trump. Only 33% said stick to your positions, even if that means that Washington doesn't work. Now 65% want Democrats to stick to their positions, even if they don't accomplish things, because they want some pushback. And that is where Chuck Schumer failed in this. We have known that March 14th was the day that we were going to have to vote on this bill for months. There was not enough preparation getting to this point. They could have branded whatever the CR was going to look like. They could have said, you know what this is? This is going to be Doge on steroids, right? They didn't do that. And then on top of it, they didn't propose their own CR. You could have come out and said, this is what we want to bring to the table. These are our priorities. It should be bipartisan to keep the government open. Let's do X, Y, and Z. Or these are the amendments that we have to have. The Republicans have done that successfully before. They did in 2021. They filibustered, and they got some of what they wanted. You're not in control, so it's not going to be perfect. But I really think it's about being a fighter and showing that you're not just going to capitulate to whatever they want. And yeah, of course, it's a good thing for Trump if he has this 47% approval, highest, but also his disapproval is the highest he's ever had in the NBC poll as well, at 51%. It's the highest percentage of people who think that their business outcome for the next year, it's at the highest level since 1980. He's underwater on every category except handling immigration. There are openings for Democrats to be doing well at this moment, and we're up on the generic ballot. If Trump's so great, then why do you want Democrats to control Congress?
The problem is that the Democrats are suffering from Trump derangement syndrome.
Well, that's the
and
D-block.
So they can't, I know that, but they
How about
can't
those
even
egg
get
prices, huh? Gas
They're
prices,
down
Jessica.
$3.50 a dozen.
Loading on eggs all weekend.
I know.
I ate eggs all weekend.
You did?
Yeah.
Up
Basically
next.
free.
I can tell you this, these were bad people. That was a bad group of, as I say, hombres. That was a bad group. When you look at them and you look at the crimes that they've committed, you take a look. You don't get any tougher, you don't get worse than that.
And now they're gone. President Trump defending his move to deport suspected TDA gang members as Democrats side with foreign terrorist organizations that's responsible for some horrific crimes against American citizens. I'm not sure why. You got new footage showing hundreds of illegal criminal gang members from Venezuela getting dropped off at a mega prison in El Salvador. They get free haircuts. That's a good thing. President Trump deported them under the Alien Enemies Act. A federal judge tried to block the move, and a hearing on that is currently underway. The Trump DOJ apparently wants the judge tossed off the El Salvador deportation case. Now, the White House claims the migrants were already on the flights and out of the U.S. This actually was true when the judge made his decision. Plus, they had good reason to get them out quickly. Watch.
These are monsters who tortured, raped, and murdered a 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungray.
And they tortured her to death. They sexually assaulted her. They stripped her and they dumped her body in a river. That's who President Trump has deported from this country. Behind every single one of those terrorists was another future rape victim, another future sex trafficking victim, another future murder victim.
But as usual, reminders like that of the gang's brutality never seem to get mentioned by Democratic lawmakers or the pundits of the media. Check this out.
What he is doing to Venezuelans is disgusting. But you know what? You voted for that. You're finding out.
Any one of us could find ourselves being deported to some country.
It is the fact that we can't trust this administration to actually use a scalpel, but instead they love to use a butcher knife on things.
We're not going to be there to allow you to just take people off the streets and split up families.
We're not at war with the gang that is the subject of the executive order. There is no invasion that is going on.
There's the author of the Mueller report, by the way. All right, so TDA. We're just randomly grabbing Venezuelans, Judge.
Yeah,
and
you
we're
gotta
just
be
putting them
careful.
on planes, giving them that unitard, and telling them to go up there, tip your waitresses, give them a free haircut, and send them to prison. Why are we doing that?
Well, you got to be careful. I mean, if you watch The View, they could pick any one of us and send us out. Look, they are so not aware of what's going on. Tren de Aragua has been declared a foreign terrorist organization. As a result of that, there is an argument under the 1798 statute that has been the Alien Enemies Act that has been used 3 times, that they are a group that is actually involved with the Venezuelan government and the El Salvadoran government, and therefore they can be deported. Now, aside from the Alien Enemies Act, they are illegal. They are committing crimes, okay? We do not have to have them convicted of a crime to remove them. But the argument that the administration is making, which I think is brilliant, is this. They are saying that under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president has the authority to engage in foreign policy. And the president and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, have been engaging in foreign policy with Berkeley as well as Maduro. And they have worked out an arrangement where Berkeley is taking these TDA members for $6 million, and a local judge, make no mistake, this is a local judge, folks, who is a trial judge. He's not even an appellate judge, thinks he can stop international diplomacy for national security issues that involve the American people because he's a local federal judge. He's stupid. And let me tell you one more thing. Tren de Aragua and MS-16. These people are savages. I used to prosecute them as a DA. They are brutal, medieval, barbaristic savages, and they should be removed from this country immediately without any explanation. And if the Democrats want to take the side of these savages, let them. But the truth is Donald Trump is protecting the Democrat big cities and the people who live in them.
Dana, it looks like there was 261 sent out, 101 were Venezuelans, but there's going to be a 2-week pause as the judge gets a chance to evaluate who the next group are and is he allowed to do this?
I find it very hard to imagine that these gang members are going to get back on a plane and come to America and have hearings here. Like, I think
that's not gonna happen.
That is definitely not going to happen.
The next group.
That's what the Democrats are thinking about that would happen. But the communications on this is so fascinating to me. So first of all, you have a judge that's sort of like, you know, like when a low-level security officer gets a whistle, and then they just want to blow it all the time, and they feel powerful with the whistle. It sort of feels like that a little bit. I also understand there is due process. I get it, but I think I'm not going to argue the law. Of course, the judge has all of that. But this is how I think American people look at this. So you're telling me that one president can let all the TDA members come in, but the next president can't get them out? That doesn't make any sense to people. And the president is running circles around the opposition, and he baits them into defending the gang members. And again, then they're so mixed up in their own problems with Chuck Schumer and the anti-Semitism, and they don't have a coherent message just to be like, guys, we want them out of here too.
Right. So, Greg, were you upset when they didn't turn the plane around in mid-flight last day? Were you able to have a good weekend anyway? Look on the bright side?
I'm glad that, Brian, that this is funny to you. I'm sure you're getting a big kick out of these young men. We don't know how many of those men are honor roll students?
Right.
You don't know that,
I'm
right?
pretty sure they weren't.
Exactly. I can't. These are dreamers.
Right.
They're dreamers, and we're sending them out there. Some of them identify as grandmothers. Right. We're sending grandmothers back to dangerous countries. How soon will you find that one case? The Democrats will find that one case.
I already have it.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Of course.
Let me guess. Is his name Jose? Let's say Jose Cuervo. But he has a child with reverse dyslexia and a stutter. And now Jose is gone, and who's going to take care of this child? They do this with Doge, they do this with the abortion ruling, and they will find one example. You need only one example to derail adult-like behavior that makes sense to everybody. These are all criminals. What did I say in the A block? And be careful, Jessica. I don't want you to become this person. About the women who marry men on death row. You saw The View. You saw Crockett. You've listened to AOC. These are all young, and some really old women, like, defending killers and rapists. And it's like, you got to ask them, okay, would you be alone in a room with them? The people you're defending, would you get on a subway car with the Trendale Rogwins or whatever they're called? They're just a club. But we totally glossed over the best part of this story. The video is amazing. It was like directed by Michael Bay or something. Did you watch it? Yeah. Better than anything on Netflix. Anything.
Well, there was Prison Break.
Well, yeah, it was like there was nobody tied to a chair. There weren't like one woman beating up three guys, which happens in every like Jack Reacher episode. There was no Kevin Hart, no Nicole Kidman. It was like amazing.
No Nicole Kidman.
Right.
But she's in everything.
El Salvador, how about Marco Rubio worked out this deal with El Salvador the first week he was there.
Yeah.
He said, if you want, I'll take your prisoners. Venezuela, we can't count on them to put them in prison because they let them out one time. Just for the record, if you have reverse dyslexia, I don't think you have dyslexia.
Exactly.
Right. That's what I wrote down, too. I was like,
exactly.
That means really.
I wanted to see if you were listening, Brian.
I was for a change, and thank you. I believe I passed the test.
Everything that you said.
Jessica, your thoughts? Do you miss them already, all those Venezuelans?
No. Listen, it's ludicrous to allege that any Democrat is losing sleep or upset over verified gang members who have raped and tortured and murdered Americans being sent out of here. Great if you negotiated that deal. I think we're paying $6 million to the El Salvadorian government for them to take them into these prison camps.
Get to the one case.
Funny you should mention that. No, there is good reason that everybody is saying alleged members and suspected members, because these people, as Dana said, have not gotten their due process. And there's an immigration attorney who has been posting about her client who was supposed to show up in court on Thursday, has been disappeared since then, is allegedly on this plane, and this person
what was he supposed to show up in court for?
He had a legitimate asylum claim. He had tattoos.
Legitimate asylum. It's not legitimate until a judge says it's legitimate.
But if you make it so that that person can't see a judge, then you're denying them their due process.
I don't know if I buy
What Trump is essentially saying is that the asylum system, as we know it, is done. That you can show up here and you're fleeing from persecution in Venezuela, for instance, and you don't get your day in court. So if that's what it is moving forward, then just say that. Be honest.
But you know the asylum system has been gamed.
Sure,
it is completely exploited by criminals.
Most don't even show up, and most don't get approval.
You can throw whatever you want at the wall. I'm still going to finish
what
I'm saying.
That's just facts.
No, but it isn't facts.
We should build a wall.
They're illegal. They don't belong here in the first place. If they weren't invited.
Then just be honest and say it's not about getting criminals out. It's about getting everyone out who is here illegally. That we can pick up anyone. And that's not Whoopi Goldberg or Joy Behar. Obviously, they're not getting
deported. You do the worst first. That's what we're doing.
But why is this person?
See, one person.
No, but this is the first flight. Why can't you just wait to let everyone get processed?
So you agree?
Yes, it's the first flight of deportations of this
I'm going to give you this, Jessica. I'm so glad you agree with what's being done. You just have a problem with how it's being done. So we're making progress.
Right. I would say this. They've been rounded up. They had 37,000 have been rounded up, and I don't even think it's been quick enough. I think there's a lot more criminals. If there were no sanctuary cities, we'd have had a lot of them.
But doesn't it, as an advocate for our legal system, and you certainly believe in due process, are you not disturbed by the idea that there could be people on this flight?
No, I'm not disturbed because they're illegal, and the
why can't they claim asylum?
First of all, the Democrats couldn't even say the word Lake and Riley. Now they want to talk on behalf of Trendale Rogwin.
Biden said it. You just didn't like how he said it.
I didn't like how who said it.
No, he mispronounced it. Marjorie Taylor Greene yelled it out.
They couldn't
say
it.
He didn't know what the name was.
No, he didn't say it until they demanded he say it.
You're saying
and you know what?
Jocelyn
Ungary is another victim of Trendale Rogwin.
Jocelyn Ungary,
Okay,
I'm
and
not
how
the
about
enemy
the
on this. I'm
apartments?
just saying, if you don't believe in due process anymore, then be honest about it, because that's what's going on here.
The only due process I believe in is the legal way to enter this country.
But claiming asylum is legal.
Yeah, well, only if you do the legal process.
But they
you
tried,
don't come
and then
illegally.
they're being disappeared from their court
They're
hearing.
being disappeared. Americans are being disappeared.
We're losing out on a lot of eligible bachelors for young women.
Right.
That's all I want to point out.
All right, 27 minutes now after the hour. Ahead. Before Elon Musk, Barack Obama was Doge's biggest fan. I'll explain next.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer facing criticism from fellow Democrats over his decision to support a bill to avoid a government shutdown. It comes amid low approval ratings for the Democratic Party, and as Senator Schumer's leadership is now called into question. Senior national correspondent Aisha Hasni has the latest tonight.
Amid fiery protests, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is postponing all of his book tour events this week, citing security concerns. The New York Democrat continues to face intense backlash from his decision to back a GOP bill to fund the government.
But I can tell you that there are a lot of people that are watching his leadership in this moment.
Some Democrats are now questioning whether Schumer should keep his job,
Well, look, I think it's an open question.
while others call for New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to primary him.
I'm not saying the Democrats should be having that conversation, but I do know this: the Democrats are.
When asked by a New York Times podcast whether he should step down,
Let me say this. There is spirited disagreements on which was the right vote.
on Sunday, Schumer received public support from a senator widely believed to be a potential replacement, albeit with a caveat.
I think the only way that we are going to be effective as a caucus is if we change our tactics.
A winning strategy against President Trump has evaded Democrats for weeks. New NBC polling shows the party hitting an all-time low, with just 27% of Americans viewing them positively. And a CNN poll asking who Americans think is the leader of the Democratic Party found AOC leading with only 10%.
But Democrats have to do some soul searching. We have to be a party that has to stop the circular firing squads.
And Brett, this week, some Democrats will try to refocus their attacks on President Trump by holding town halls in competitive but Republican-held districts. The House Republicans campaign chair, Richard Hudson, telling Fox News that this is all really political theater from a party that is simply out of step, out of touch with the American people. Brett.
Aisha Hasni live on the Hill. Aisha, thanks.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.